Listen, a whistle splits the morning, 100 doors swing wide, lunch pails knock against knees, bandanas are tied, sleeves rolled, gloves pulled tight. A nation short of hands stands at the threshold of its greatest test, and the floor boss points to the line. The world is on fire. Ships burn in distant seas. Cities go dark at night. Draft boards empty small towns and big city blocks alike, and the factories that feed the war machine gasp for breath. The posters arrive. Bright ink, a rolled-up promise pinned to break room cork. We can do it. It is not yet a slogan. It's a dare. Beyond the paper and the paint, something larger takes shape. Classrooms are swept out and turned into training bays. Drill presses get new operators. A micrometer settles into a steady hand that learned needlework on a kitchen table. Rivets bloom like steel roses across wing skins. Sparks fan out from a seam as a torch meets hull plate. The work is loud, fast, exacting, and it must be perfect the first time. This is not just filling a gap, it is building a bridge over it. On the aircraft line and in shipyards, in machine shops and powder rooms, women learn the craft at speed, then teach the next in line. They spot a bottleneck, rearrange the jigs, shave seconds from emotion, and save days on a schedule. They wire instrument panels by memory. They read blueprints like novels. They sign their names in grease pencil on the final inspection tag and send the thing they built toward danger. Risk is part of the shift. Heat, weight, solvents, and noise. Night school after days that began before dawn. A bus ride home to children asleep. A poster on the wall that isn't a picture of one woman, but a mirror for millions. The whistle blows again, belts turn, presses cycle. A wing lifts, a ship slides, a radio crackles to life, and the arsenal hums. This is the sound of a free country opening its workshops to all of its talent. This is the promise kept. Beyond the icon in the song, the truth. American women closed the labor gap, transformed industry, and kept the lines running until the guns fell silent. From poster to policy, closing the labor gap. Pearl Harbor turns a calendar page into a countdown. Factories that once made stoves, cars, cash registers, and silk stockings are told to make guns, planes, radios, and parachutes, and to make them in quantities no plan has ever contemplated. Draft boards pull men from shop floors. The production charts surge upward while the available hands fall away. What begins as an arithmetic problem, too few workers for too many machines, becomes a national policy question. Who will lift the rivet gun, swing the hoist, balance the calipers? Washington answers by reorganizing the country around the bottleneck. In January 1942, the War Production Board takes command of materials and conversion, and in April, the War Manpower Commission is created to command the one resource everything else depends on: people. The U.S. Employment Service, folded into that new commission, becomes a giant talent switchboard, registering skills, issuing referrals, and shunting workers from low-priority jobs to essential lines. Plant managers learn a new vocabulary: essential, priority, allocation, deferment. If a lathe operator can turn out propeller shafts instead of lawnmower axles, the government helps move her. And yes, the pronoun is changing because it has to. Words alone won't staff a night shift. So the Office of War Information coordinates a second front, on the walls, in the papers, on the radio. The advertising trade retools for country, turning copywriters and illustrators into recruiters. A Westinghouse morale poster, "We Can Do It," goes up inside a handful of plants in early 1943, a brief in-house shout of confidence that will become an icon only decades later. Out in public, Norman Rockwell paints a muscular worker with a bandana and a lunch pail labeled Rosie, footset atop a battered copy of Mein Kampf. She stares the viewer down from the Saturday Evening Post, then tours the nation raising war bond money. On the air, a swing tune called Rosie the Riveter bounces across living rooms, and the chorus slips an idea into the rhythm of daily life. Women aren't just cheering the war, they are doing the work. But recruitment posters are invitations, policy is permission and pathway. The War Manpower Commission and state vocational boards opened training centers in school basements, union halls, and cordoned off corners of factory floors. The same federal push that standardizes aircraft bolts and gauges standardizes instruction. Job instruction, job methods, job relations, short, hard modules taught by foremen who are retrained to teach, not just to drive production. The old assumption that a machinist must serve years to be trusted makes way for a wartime truth. With a clear method, a good jig, and a careful trainer, a novice can be safe and precise quickly. The clock is the adversary, the procedure is the weapon. Screening turns from gatekeeping into guidance. Applicants sit for dexterity boards and simple mechanical tests. Stiff physical standards soften where they never really mattered. New standards are written for the jobs that do. A woman of 40 with good eyes and a steady wrist is welcomed to the wiring bench. A farm wife who has repaired a tractor in mud and rain proves she can master a half-inch air gun on a wing rib. The employment office issues badges and directions. The plant issues gloves, safety glasses, and a new vocabulary: torque, pitch, fillet, datum. The first day on the line is a shock to the senses. The speed is unnatural until it becomes normal. The noise is waves, punch presses that stamp a rhythm into your bones, overhead belts whispering in a constant rush, the hiss of a torch, the thump click of a rivet bucked correctly, the anxious silence that follows a mistake. The precision is humbling. A rivet that mushrooms is drilled out and done again. A weld fails, bend back, and you start over. A bore that's out of tolerance by a width of a fingernail can scrap a weak schedule. You learn to keep time with the line, to move just enough, never too far, hands memorizing distances the eye stops measuring. This is where policy meets craft. The manpower planners don't buck the rivets, you do. But their rules shape your day so you can. Shift buses stop at corners they chose. The lunch whistle blows to a schedule they wrote. The foreman who once dismissed girls on the heavy stuff now points you to the jig because headquarters counted idle machines and unanswered requisitions and made him a conversion problem to solve. The government's essential employment classifications grant deferments to keep the crew intact. The War Labor Board arbitrates disputes to keep the line running. Not every policy is just and not every foreman is ready, but the structure holds and the numbers begin to move. Training narrows the gap from both ends. The lessons are short and relentless. How to sight a rivet line without a pencil mark. How to read a blueprint and see in 3 dimensions. How to dress a grinding wheel, square a block, check a thread with a gauge, cut safely with speed. In the welding booth, you burn hours of practice plate, pass a bend test, and receive a small stamp that will follow your seams onto ship hulls you'll never see afloat. In the inspection cage, you learn the quiet authority of reject and how to use it without apology. Certification, once a private right, becomes a public promise. Your badge says you can read micrometers. Your worksheet says you can pass an inspection bay with 10 samples in a row. Your name in grease pencil on an aluminum skin is a signature the line respects. The plant reorganizes around learning. 1 experienced operator, 2 trainees. The trainees become trainers. The cycle repeats. The bottleneck shifts, and a new class opens to close it. None of this happens by accident. It happens because a nation writes new rules for who belongs in a machine shop and then enforces them with urgency. It happens because governors and mayors work with manpower officers to route people where the shortages are, and because the newspapers print the addresses of places to apply. It happens because unions, sometimes eagerly, sometimes grudgingly, negotiate seniority ladders that include new hires, and because management, sometimes eagerly, sometimes grudgingly, accepts that quality is the argument that ends arguments. It happens because the country learns to tell a different story about strength, and the story is persuasive because the results show up on the floor. A hiring quota that seemed optimistic becomes Tuesday. A whole crew that never existed a month ago clocks in for the swing shift. A department once confined to women's work, parachute rigging, harness stitching, instrument wiring, adds women to drill presses, brake presses, milling machines, and bucking bars. The language of the place changes. Girls becomes operators, welders, inspectors. Point a camera down the aisle at the start of a shift and you see the reality the posters promised. Sleeves rolled up, jaws set, hands steady. There is friction. There will be a chapter for it. There are closed doors. There will be a chapter for them too. Some plants refuse to hire until a federal investigator from Fair Employment rings the bell and asks uncomfortable questions. Some jobs are declared light or female and paid less, though the work is not light, and nothing is inherently male or female about a torque wrench. Some workers nod at the poster and sneer at the person. And yet the arc bends because the assignment is larger than the prejudice, and the policy gives the better instincts leverage. What does the conversion look like from a distance? It looks like a map of the United States blinking to life. Booming towns along the coasts and rivers, inland airframe plants, engine works in former auto cities, arsenal villages where cornfields turned into proving grounds. It looks like state vocational schools extending their hours into the night and companies building classrooms under the mezzanine. It looks like the U.S. Employment Service posting "Women Wanted" with clear job titles and wages, and the newspapers printing stories about mothers who learned to rivet faster than the men they replaced, because pride, too, is a lever. What does it feel like up close? It feels like learning a language by immersion. At first, the words are foreign. Then your hands know them before your mouth does. A blueprint ceases to be paper and becomes an object you can turn over in your head. The tool crib stops being a wall of metal and becomes a vocabulary of solutions. A foreman's frown becomes a challenge you know how to answer. Run it again. A steady day on the line isn't an accident. It's a product of every memo, every training module, every policy that put you there and kept you there long enough to become excellent. By the end of 1942, the idea that women were a stopgap is already outdated on the floor, even if it lingers in headlines. By 1943, the word shortage means something different, not of workers, but of hours in the day. The question is no longer whether women can do the work. It is whether the country can build enough jigs and buy enough machines and lay enough track to match the speed of the crews it has trained. The whistle brings you back. You badge in. The clock hand tips forward. The line starts. Policy has done what policy must. It has taken an abstraction, labor supply, and turned it into a pair of gloved hands setting a rivet flush. The posters still smile from the walls, and they matter. They set a tone. But the nation did not win a war with a picture. It won because it matched the promise to a pathway, the invitation to instruction, the call to the bus route and the badge. The gap closed, not in speeches but in shifts. On the line, factories, safety, and child care at scale. The doors opened to a different America, cathedrals of steel and glass where daylight filters through clear stories onto aisles, so long they bend with the earth. Forklifts chirp, overhead cranes glide. A sign at the time clock reads like an oath. Eyes, hands, mind on the job. Bandanas go on, hairnets tucked tight, rings and bracelets stay at home. The shift whistle folds the room into motion. Aircraft first, because the war will be decided in miles per hour and miles per gallon. Along the wing line, skins shimmer in rows like lake water. A crew rivets in pairs, one on the gun, one on the bucking bar, the duet learned in hours of practice plate and measured now in perfect domes. Drill, deburr, countersink, set, check. Wiring benches sprawl under lamps, looms for radios and instruments snake across plywood templates. Each wire measured, crimped, tagged, and tested until the panel lights with a forest of tiny stars. At engine assembly, torque wrenches click in a steady counterpoint. Valve clearances are not guesses, they are values, read, recorded, cross-checked. Inspection is not a formality. A woman with a micrometer and the authority to say no is the last line between the factory and a pilot who will never know her name. Down at the shipyards, the volume is elemental, arc flash and sea air. Welding replaces rivets along much of the hull. A torch hisses, a puddle forms, and a steady hand rides the pale blue oval. Feeding rod, keeping travel speed true, pausing to break an arc before heat warps a plate. Fitters swing plates into place by chalk marks and scribed lines, then dog them tight for the welders to seal. Whole sections of ships, bow assemblies, deck houses, machinery flats are built like giant kit parts and flown down the ways to meet their keels. In the blast shop, grit roars. In the paint bay, air nozzles hiss. In the pipe loft, blueprints bloom into 3 dimensions. The days are numbered not in hours, but in launches. Munitions plants are quieter by rule and by fear. The air smells of solvents, acids, cordite. Powder lines are color-coded. Static straps touch skin. Shoes ground the body to the floor. Every operation has a ritual. The sweep of powder to prevent accumulation, the pause before a press closes, the double count of fuses. Chemistry is not abstract here. It stains gloves and can stain hands. A supervisor's job is to make sure the day ends exactly as it began, intact. Machine tool rooms are the war's grammar school. Mill tables track under hands that have learned backlash by feel. Lathes throw spirals of bright curl that drop into bins with a musical clatter. A new operator makes a first cut into a practice block and reads the story in the chips, too blue, too long, too powdery, then adjusts. Go, no-go gauges decide the question with a merciless click. Pass is pass, fail is do it again. The old myth that precision is a mystery dies at a bench cluttered with 1, 2, 3 blocks, surface plates, and the confidence of repetition. None of this happens safely by accident. There is no OSHA yet, no universal rulebook, so safety is manufactured the way anything else is, designed, trained, measured, improved. Guarding goes onto presses that never had guards before. Kick plates appear where a moment's inattention could catch a boot. Earplugs and safety glasses are handed out at the door. Hair snoods become as standard as gloves. Posters are preachy because they have to be. The next accident is waiting for your hands. Tie it back. Keep your eyes. First aid rooms become clinics. Clinics become small hospitals with x-ray, tetanus, stitches, and the calm competence of nurses who know the difference between grit and a cornea and something worse. Training turns safety into muscle memory. Before anyone touches a live press, they cycle it cold, then with scrap, then under a trainer's eyes. Welding booths don't open until a bend test stamp is earned. Rivet guns don't go to the line until practice trees show a row of perfect buttons. The 3 short courses of wartime industry: how to do the job, how to improve the job, how to work with people, show up every time a foreman corrects technique instead of barking, every time a worker rearranges a jig to save a reach and shares it down the row. Safety travels with quality because the cheapest accident is the one that never had a chance to happen. Cafeterias are as strategic as machine shops. People can't run on coffee and slogans. Menus read like logistics. High-calorie plates for the swing shift, quick salts and soups for winter, fruit when the trains bring it. Hand wash stations multiply, locker rooms get proper benches, drinking fountains sprout alongside every bay. The canteen line is long but fast, trays move, and the 10 minutes of quiet at a table are as important as the 1,000 rivets after. Then, the missing piece that makes double shifts possible: childcare. Wartime promises are worth exactly the supports that underwrite them, and in boomtowns where the morning bus is full of mothers, the calculus is simple. Community centers open in repurposed schoolhouses and new halls. The best of the big yards build their own. Bright rooms with low sinks, cots for naps, book corners, sandboxes under awnings, and a nurse who knows every child by name. Hours match shifts, not doctrine. Dawn drop-offs and midnight pickups are normal. Hot lunches are served on tiny plates. There's a doctor's office down the hall and a laundry where coveralls and small clothes both get washed. Parents sign in with grease under their fingernails and sign out to find their kids clean, fed, and sleepy. The politics of care can be argued elsewhere. The practice is here, and it works. Housing and transit stretch to meet the new geography of work. Dorms go up, trailer parks fill, buses run odd routes on odder schedules, a second-hand bicycle becomes a treasure. The front gate posts a map of shuttle stops and shift changes, and a note that reads like a quiet revolution: "If you are needed here, we will get you here." The line learns together. Early weeks are slow, scrap rates pinch, welds fail, bend back. Inspectors fill red tags with a careful hand. Then the curves bend. Crews learn to stage parts so hands never idle. A jig gets a new clamp. A bench gets a foot rail. The walking wasted in a day shrinks by miles. An operator moves a switch to the left because a right-hand reach breaks rhythm, and the change ripples down the bay. These are small victories that add up to a ship launched days sooner, an airplane finished a week early, a crate of radios that passed test in one run instead of 3. No one will write a song for a relocated foot pedal, but the pilot flying through weather trusts it all the same. Quality becomes culture because the work demands it and the workers claim it. The inspector who stamps reject is a teammate, not an enemy. A wingskin drilled wrong is a story, not a shame. What happened, where, what fix will prevent the next one? Statistical checks, tallies on clipboards, charts pinned to cork, quietly convert opinion into trend. A foreman's favorite operator is the one whose work makes those charts boring. There are still hazards, and the record of the war will note them honestly. Solvents bite lungs. Repetitive motion gnaws at wrists and shoulders. Powder plants are one mistake away from grief, and some towns will carry that grief for years. Shipyard slips are unforgiving, a moment of inattention when rigging slings can turn a plate into a pendulum. The answer is not romance, it is engineering, procedure, and the stubborn insistence that a safe day is part of the job. When an accident happens, the investigation begins with the assumption that systems fail before people do. Women are visibly everywhere, and so are the arguments about where they should be. Some plants declare certain jobs light and pay them less. Hands that have been steady on a bucking bar know better. Some supervisors discover that respect buys more output than contempt. The worst do not, and they find their crews gone to the shop across town with a different reputation. Unions battle over seniority ladders and classifications. Management battles over who gets the new machines. In the middle, crews build airplanes and ships and radios because the enemy will not wait for perfect justice. Progress comes in increments. A posted rate equalized here, a closed department opened there, a woman promoted to lead, an inspection bay that quietly becomes a kingdom of competence. At scale, the line looks like choreography. Bodies move with economy. Tools live where hands expect them. Carts arrive with parts. Finished assemblies leave on schedule. A single aisle contains 10 trades. The grace is in the handoff. A prying bar nudges a panel home. A bucking bar catches the next strike. A hand across the aisle holds up 2 fingers. Wait, because the drill on the far side will chatter if both push at once. Each day ends with a sweep that is half sanitation and half pride. Sweepings in bins, tools back on shadow boards, travelers clipped to the work, the next shift able to see what it owes the last. At human scale, the line is a ledger of small, stubborn excellences. A worker who once thought, "I could never do that," now says, "Run it." A young inspector who was told to be shy says, "Reject," without looking at the floor. A welder who held her breath for every start learns to breathe into the puddle and make seams that look like they grew there. Someone figures out a way to stage parts so the shortest person on the crew never has to climb a crate again. Someone else redraws a wiring harness to fit the human hands that must build it, and the engineer sighs, then smiles, then signs. The war is 1,000,000 of these things collected into ships that float, and planes that fly, and radios that speak across oceans. When the whistle blows the end of shift, the factory exhales. The line does not end. It hands the day to the next crew and maps its future in chalk and tags. Outside, the cafeteria is closed, but the childcare lights are on. A mother signs for a sleeping child and a bag of tomorrow's clean coveralls. A bus rumbles up and kneels like a ship taking on cargo. The city's night smells like oil, coffee, and the river. Somewhere far away, the things built here are already in motion. This is what "on the line" meant when the country said, "We can do it." It meant making danger ordinary and precision democratic. It meant feeding bodies to feed output, tending hands and eyes so quality would take root, and building the scaffolding of clinics, canteens, buses, beds, and classrooms that made a second shift a possibility instead of a promise broken at the door. It meant that childcare was logistics, safety was strategy, and a poster on a wall only told the truth because thousands of rooms like these made it so. Who Rosie was, diversity, conflict, and the double V. She is 17 and hearing the whistle for the first time. She is 54 and has not taken a sick day in a decade. She is married, she is widowed, she's a first-time wage earner with a folded newspaper ad in her pocket and a bus token in her glove. She knows how to mend a hem in the dark and how to fix a fence with no second pair of hands. The badge on her lapel is new. The competence it announces is not. Across the country, the hiring clerk writes "previous experience" and learns to read it differently. Dairy hands become inspection hands because steadiness is steadiness. Milliners learn wiring looms because precision is precision. A farm wife who has rebuilt a water pump in a January wind passes the torque test on her first try. A grandmother who raised 4 sons now trains 18-year-olds on a milling machine and calls them all "kid." The poster promised confidence, the floor discovers range. Then, the map changes color as geography becomes biography. The war pulls people toward work like gravity. From parishes along the Gulf and counties across the Carolinas and Georgia, trains carry black families north and west to yards and airfields that need them now. They arrive into a world with signs that still whisper old orders, separate washrooms, separate cafeterias, separate neighborhoods, and into plants where "colored" is a column on the hiring sheet that quietly limits the options. Some are steered to janitorial crews no matter what their hands can do. Some are kept off skilled lines because a supervisor is afraid of the complaints he will get. Pressure meets policy. In 1941, long before most factories changed their minds, a labor leader threatens a march on Washington to expose defense industry color bars to the whole world. The White House blinks, then signs a promise. No discrimination in defense contracts, a fair employment practice committee to look behind locked doors and ask hard questions. It is not a magic key, but it is leverage. When a shipyard says there are no qualified applicants, the FEPC sends a list. When a foreman says, "Not on my line," a manpower officer asks about the idle machines on his floor. A month later, a black woman in coveralls is welding a seam that must not fail, and the only question is whether the bend test says yes. The shop learns quickly because the war learns quickly. Hate strikes, men walking out because a black worker has been upgraded, flash and sputter, then collapse under the weight of schedules and the quiet certainty of a forewoman who says, "We have work to do." Cafeteria tables that once divided by habit start to mix by convenience, then by friendship, because a shared shift and a shared joke climb over fences that laws built. Pay is another fence. The posted rate says one thing, the envelope says another. The National War Labor Board backs a simple principle: equal pay for equal work to keep employers from cutting wages when they hire women. But the enforcement is uneven, and the arguments are old. The women on the line do the arithmetic with a steady eye and add fair to the list of things they mean when they say victory. In newspapers, the Pittsburgh Courier prints a campaign with a logo that looks like a promise, a big V for victory against enemies overseas, and a second V for victory at home. The double V pins show up on lapels at bus stops outside factories before dawn. The words are not an abstraction in those lines. A woman who clocks in at the press break and clocks out to a neighborhood red-lined against her family knows exactly what two victories would feel like. She is not a symbol. She is the person who caught a misdrilled pattern before it reached the wing and saved a pilot she will never meet. She sends a son to war. She sends a ship to sea. She sends a letter to a union hall about posted rates. She keeps moving. On the West Coast, the boom is sudden and total. New yards raise cities on the Columbia and the Bay, and the new cities need everyone. Mexican-American women who stitched fruit crates and canned peaches last summer now buck rivets on the graveyard shift and send money home to cousins still in farm camps. Bilingual forewomen turned safety briefings into 2 languages before the arc flash goes bright. Families that arrive with one suitcase discover a block of prefab houses, a clinic, a day nursery, and a school that will call their children by the names they brought with them. The tensions of a city that grew too fast are real. Housing scarce, nerves short, old prejudices walking in the open. And yet every launch day the river fills with steel. A woman in a bandana leans on a railing and points at a hull sliding into the current and says, "That seam, mine." Across the Pacific Coast states, another headline runs in the opposite direction. Entire neighborhoods of Japanese Americans are emptied into guarded camps under a policy that bundles fear, prejudice, and wartime panic into a single order. The losses are total: homes, shops, professions. Inside the barbed wire, women keep children fed and schools open. In camp sewing rooms, they make uniforms and coats against high desert wind. Some, granted passes after loyalty interrogations, leave for Midwestern cities, finding work in offices and labs, quiet contributions invisible behind the news. A few put on uniforms and serve. Clerks in headquarters, translators in the back rooms where language itself is a tool of war. They carry the paradox of the war in their pockets, a country that needs everybody's talent, and a country that cannot yet trust everybody it needs. Chinese American women, freed from the shadow of an exclusion law finally repealed in wartime, step into new roles in plants and, in rare but real cases, in uniform. Filipina nurses arrive to help staff hospitals overwhelmed by the wounded. Native women leave reservations for ordnance depots and aircraft plants, then send money home that keeps distant communities alive through the winter. The faces on the line are a roll call of America's neighborhoods and histories, and the rhythm of the place is the sound of those histories overlapping without asking permission. Unions argue about how to hold the center. Craft locals guard gates to protect pride and wages. Industrial unions throw the gates wider and insist the best shield against exploitation is a big, disciplined we. Both sign a wartime no-strike pledge. Both still see wildcats when heat quotas or insult go too far. A meeting in a hall smells like coffee, sweat, paper, and the future. A woman stands and says the posted rate is not the envelope. Another asks why promotion tests are scheduled during the only hours the nursery is closed. A third points to the seniority board and observes that it forgets that people learned this trade yesterday and became good at it today. The steward takes notes. The next contract will not fix everything. It will fix something. The city itself becomes part of the story. Defense housing throws grids over old fields. Bus routes redraw the map. Neighborhoods that used to go silent after dark now hum at 2 a.m. with shift change. Churches add late services. Movie houses run matinees for people whose midnight is noon. A ladies' entrance on a corner tavern becomes just a door that more feet use. Grocers learn to stock 2 of everything because 2-worker households burn through staples faster. The idea of women's hours dissolves under fluorescent lights and freight schedules. A mother ties a kerchief at midnight and kisses a sleeping child on the forehead. A teenage girl watches her and calibrates what adulthood will mean. The social worker's clipboard calls this disruption. The woman with the lunch pail calls it Tuesday. Numbers matter because the ledger is proof. A plant that never hired a woman on the drill presses now has whole crews of them, and their scrap rate is lower because they listened closely in class and refused to accept a chatter mark as inevitable. A yard that resisted upgrading black workers posts a month of record launches and cannot unlearn its own evidence. A lab that hired computers, women with slide rules and sharpened pencils, to calculate ballistics tables discovers what happens when clear method meets bright minds with no patience for error. The tables ship early, and somewhere far away a crew chief dials in the solution and hits what he aims at. Conflict persists because victory abroad does not repeal habits at home. Boarding houses post no children. Banks write 2 signatures and then ask for a husband's that does not exist. A woman who earns less for the posted job hears a manager say, "after the war," and understands that promises can be credit extended and then called in. The newspaper prints a letter arguing that proper women should return to proper homes the day peace is signed. The letter sits beside a photograph of a woman leaning out from a wing with a bucking bar in her fist, and a grin that says the argument will be longer than an editorial. The double V is the through line, a quiet pledge whispered on buses and in locker rooms and written into minutes of meetings. Victory abroad is a ship launched, a plane delivered, a crate of radios that all pass test. Victory at home is the bathroom unsegregated, the posted rate enforced, the day nursery funded because the town decided that care is infrastructure, not charity. It is a crew list that reflects the street outside the gate. It is a foreman who stops saying girls and starts saying operators and means it. It is the knowledge that the next generation has already watched all this happen and will not pretend it did not. By late 1944, the line is no longer an experiment in inclusion. It is simply how the country works when everyone who can help is allowed to help. The pay gap narrows where charts and grievances force it. It gapes where habit holds. The old words survive in some offices. New words take their place on the floor. Lead woman, inspector, welder, steward. None of it is utopia. All of it is progress measured in the hardest units a war can afford. Days saved, lives not lost. Rooms where a decision was made differently because the room itself had changed. And what stays when the shift ends? A sense that competence, once claimed, does not go back in the box. A woman who learned to read a blueprint now reads contracts and ballots with the same calm skepticism. A family that rearranged its days around 2 paychecks learns that independence sounds like the creak of a front door opening at 3 a.m. and the small voice that asks, "Mama?" A city that built nurseries to win a war discovers that children nap just as well in peacetime, and that parents work better when the worry is shared. A country that asked for everything begins to understand what it promised in return. Who Rosie was is plural. She is the woman in the poster and the woman left outside the gate until a rule changed. She's a riveter, a welder, a machinist, a computer, a nurse, a clerk, a steward with a stack of forms and a spine of steel. She is black, Latina, Asian American, native, white. She is a migrant and a neighbor. She is new to the city and the person who knows where the best light is at the wiring bench. She is the double V, carried in a pocket, pinned to a collar, written into a day that begins before dawn and ends long after dark. She is the proof that a free nation's strength grows when it lets more of its people touch the tools. Women in uniform, WACWAVES, SPARS, Marines, WASP, and nurses. The oath sounds the same in every branch, but it lands differently when the country has only just learned to imagine you in uniform. Buttons close, collars square, hair pinned, orders in hand. A train pulls away from a small-town platform and carries clerks, teachers, stenographers, lab assistants, farm daughters, and city girls toward billets with names that will become a second hometown. Des Moines, Arlington, Pensacola, Treasure Island, Keesler, a nation that retooled its factories now retools its services, and the tabs on the shoulders say why. WACWAVES, SPARS, Marines, the quiet wings of the WASP and the white caps of the Nurse Corps. The job is not to decorate the war. The job is to move it faster, cleaner, safer, to put skill where it multiplies everything else. Army first, because the Army is everywhere. The Women's Army Auxiliary Corps stands up in 1942 and, within a year, becomes the Women's Army Corps, no longer auxiliary, but Army, with ranks, pay scales, promotions, and posts from the states to the far arcs of supply. By war's end, well over 100,000 women have worn the WAC patch. They run message centers and switchboards that thread a continent of telephones into a single voice. They type orders that move divisions and invoices that move mountains of beans, bullets, and bandages. They forecast weather for flights that cannot afford guesswork. In Arlington's converted girls' school, they break and make codes under blackout curtains. At signal depots, they test radios until the last crackle is chased from the line. In India and Burma, WACS run communications nets along jungle supply roads. In Italy, they sort and ship the mail that tells a soldier he is still inside a country that remembers his name. The Navy turns shore duty into a harbor for speed. The Waves, women accepted for volunteer emergency service, fill desks and benches at naval districts and yards, and the word desk is misleading by design. They are yeomen and storekeepers, but they are also link trainers and lab techs, crypt analysts, and weather specialists. In a warren of buildings on Nebraska Avenue in Washington, Waves sit before great steel machines whose rotating drums and clattering relays are hunting for enemy keys. The room is hot, the work exacting, and the winds invisible but decisive. In factories the Navy runs, Waves teach avionics to aviation cadets who may be younger than the women who teach them. On docks and piers, they take inventories, swipe grease from clipboards, and sign for the parts that keep ships ready to sail again. Where the Coast Guard needs harbors ordered and convoys counted, the SPARS, from the service motto, Semper Paratus, always ready, appear with crisp uniforms and lists that do not forgive error. They stand watch in port information offices, plot ship movements, code and decode, drive staff cars, and police the small, crucial arteries of 1,000 ports and beaches that never make the news. The work is discipline, paper as a weapon against chaos, and the chaos of the sea respects it. The Marine Corps is last to open the door and swift to admit its mistake. The Marine Corps Women's Reserve forms in 1943 with a blunt arithmetic. Every woman in a stateside billet frees a Marine for a rifle squad or a gun crew. They become clerks, control tower operators, parachute riggers, motor pool specialists, map makers, photographers. The eagle, globe, and anchor on a sleeve is not an accessory. It is a promise that the standard will not bend. They drill, they qualify, they carry themselves like the thing on their cap means what it says. By late 1944, tens of thousands of marinettes, as the papers call them at first, have made the nickname obsolete. They are Marines. Across the services, nurses wear the oldest tab and shoulder the most ancient work, keeping death from the door when it is already standing inside the tent. The Army Nurse Corps grows from a few thousand at the war's start to tens of thousands by its end. The Navy Nurse Corps multiplies as hospital ships fill the sea lanes. They go early and close. North Africa, Sicily and Salerno. Anzio, where the shells walk into the wards. In the Pacific, they land in Australia and New Guinea, and finally on islands so new to the map that the paint is wet. They run evacuation hospitals where canvas flaps against poles and the light is a hard, bare bulb. They run general hospitals that are small cities with laundry, labs, X-ray, pharmacy, surgery, and the quiet authority of a charge nurse who sees everything and forgets nothing. On C-47s and C-54s, flight nurses learn the mathematics of altitude and shock, trim blankets as carefully as surgeons trim gauze, and talk wounded men down from fear at 10,000 feet. The survival graphs tilt upward as sulfa and penicillin arrive, and as methods, triage, transfusion, sterile technique under field conditions, are standardized and drilled until they look like instinct. Then, the wings without insignia on the collar and a name that will be honored late, WASP, the Women Air Force Service Pilots. They are already licensed when they apply. The training is short only because the standards are not. From desert bases in cold northern fields, they ferry warplanes from factory to depot, depot to port, and sometimes field to field when a repair will not wait. Trainers, transports, pursuit planes, bombers, 70-odd types in all, flown clean by hands that learn to feel the difference in a new airframe within a minute of rotation. They tow sleeves for gunnery practice and fly as on-the-spot test pilots after a hard landing has been hammered straight by a ground crew that wants a confidence check. They log millions of miles and do it under orders that never quite catch up to their reality. When a WASP dies in a crash, and some do, the War Department does not cover the cost to ship her home. Her classmates take up a collection, and a flag appears because someone cared enough to borrow one. A generation later, the country will make the paperwork match the service already rendered. In the war, the flying is the proof. Acceptance, resistance, losses, honors. The balance sheet of uniformed women is written in both ink and erasures. Acceptance looks like a barracks where good order and shared duty turn strangers into a crew, like a commanding officer who measures by performance and visits a mess hall to say so, like stripes earned and worn without apology. Resistance looks like a rumor that pace sets promotion, like a smirk when a woman walks into a classroom, like an order to return to civilian life, penciled into policy drafts before the guns have even quieted. Losses are not abstract, they have names. Nurses interned for years in the Philippines keep wards going behind wire, ration medicine like saints, and come home with a calm that fools no one. Flight nurses die in crashes that do not make the front page. WACs die in accidents in the same gray areas where the Army puts anyone not in a foxhole but still inside the war's reach. Honors arrive unevenly. Bronze stars and unit citations pinned to some blouses. Others will wait decades for the certificate that says veteran, as if the skin under the uniform had not known it all along. What did all this do to the war's tempo? Everything. Every shore patrol ledger balanced by a SPARS yeoman kept a convoy on time. Every requisition processed by a WAVE storekeeper moved a bearing or a bolt from storage to a deck gun before the ship sailed. Every WAC weather plot refined a route and saved a plane from an icing layer it could not escape. Every nurse who turned away infection or shock returned a trained crewman to his unit, days or weeks sooner than the war's last version. Every WASP ferry flight that put a new aircraft into a squadron freed a combat pilot to practice tactics instead of cross-country dead reckoning. Freeing a man to fight sounds like a slogan until you watch the math scale across 1,000,000 posts. The multiplication is the point. There is another multiplication inside the work itself: method. Uniforms impose standard and sequence, and those habits travel home. A WAVE who learned to maintain a radio by checklist will not unlearn the value of a checklist in an office or a lab. A WAC who set up a message center that could not fail will not forget how to build redundancy into a payroll system or a post office. A nurse who organized a ward in chaos will walk into any room for the rest of her life and quietly make a map. The women who coded messages learned to parse a process. The women who decoded messages learned to respect pattern and anomaly. Wartime systems thinking becomes peacetime competence, and the country will, slowly, discover that it has trained a cohort of managers, engineers, teachers, scientists, administrators, and pilots without intending to. The friction remains because it is baked into the time. A training film says, "lady," and then shows a work that allows no pedestal. A newspaper photo captions a group of Marines as girls wearing uniforms they earned. A commanding officer praises the morale lift of a band concert and neglects to mention the munitions throughput the same unit improved by reorganizing a dock schedule. The women take the compliment, fix the schedule, and move on. When the war slackens late in 1945, notices appear. Services will demobilize, billets will close, orders will end. Some women fold uniforms and go home. Some keep a commission or a rating and write the first paragraphs of careers that will not be erased. Some marry men who understand exactly what these years proved, and some do not. All carry a ledger of competence no order can cancel. And yet the war keeps a record deeper than policy. Somewhere in a family trunk, a discharge paper. In an old wallet, a mess card. In a frame, a woman in a cap, jaw set, eyes forward. Somewhere in a museum case, a pair of flight nurse wings. In another, a WASP graduation photo with names in white ink. Somewhere in a service history, an obscure line about a lab at Aberdeen where computers, women with slide rules, produced ballistics tables that left fewer crews guessing. A note about 6 of them at war's end, learning to wire a new machine called ENIAC to do in seconds what used to take hours. For the moment, the world calls it clerical work. History will relabel it. Stand at the edge of a parade in 1945, and you will see everything you need to know. Marching bands, flags, banners the size of barns, and in between, ranks of uniforms that the nation, 3 years earlier, had never imagined it would need, much less honor. The applause is not perfunctory. The war has been long. The crowd understands that the people who kept the phones working, kept the ships on schedule, kept the pilots trained and the planes delivered, kept wards lit through nights that shook the ground. Those people shortened the war and softened its cost. If the thanks are sometimes clumsy, the gratitude is not. Uniforms alone did not win the war. Nothing alone did. But when the country put women into its order of battle, on paper and then in practice, it discovered that capacity is a choice, and that the choice is contagious. The WAC, the WAVE, the SPAR, the Marine, the WASP, the nurse. Each is a proof. Write them together and you have a doctrine. Give them the tools, the training, and the authority, and the machine, military and industrial, runs faster and with fewer mistakes. That is not a social argument. It is a performance report with victory stamped across the bottom. Proof on the ledger, output, breakthroughs, and the long day's end. Open the books, not the posters, not the slogans, the ledgers, columns of dates, lot numbers, units accepted, units rejected, hours per hull, hours per wing, scrap rates trending down until the graph looks like a staircase you can run. The proof of what women did is not a mood, it's arithmetic written in grease pencil and ink. Start with air. A country that built cars by the mile turns to airframes by the acre. The first months are chaos, fixtures late, gauges inconsistent, drawings revised while the bench is already cutting metal. Then the line learns itself. Sub-assemblies leave their corners on skids and begin moving on tracks. Wings, tails, and fuselages converge in a choreography that looks inevitable only after someone invents it. The rhythm is not magic. It is the sum of small inventions. A jig with a handle at the human height, a tray that delivers the next 6 rivets to the left hand without a reach, a drill that hangs from a balancer so wrists last all day. The result is a number that would have sounded like propaganda 2 years earlier. A completed aircraft finished not in months, not in weeks, but in days, and then in hours, because the crew has turned time itself into a material they know how to cut. Move to the yards. Once, a ship was a sequence of craftsmen bending wood to will. Now, steel arrives as plate and shape, is cut by patterns, welded into sections, and lifted into place by cranes with the ease of a hand setting a loaf on a shelf. A hull that used to grow from keel to rail in one long, slow biography now arrives as chapters that lock together on schedule. Welders, many of them women, trade the old language of hammer and rivet for the blue-white sentence of a clean bead. Launch calendars tighten. A shipyard that once christened a hull on a holiday now lines the river with masts and funnels like trees in a forest, launches on a weekday, and goes back to work. In the plants that make the parts that make the war, the invisible victories multiply. Machine shops are the bottleneck, and then they aren't, because operators who were told precision was a mystery learn that precision is a method. A go/no-go gauge replaces an opinion. A surface plate replaces a shrug. A new operator, taught to read a blueprint like a map, cuts a bore that seats a bearing that spins without complaint at altitude. Inspection stamps pile on travelers like passport visas. Parts move because they passed, not because someone said please. The scrap bin grows lighter, the shipping crate heavier. The ledger records the exchange. Quality is not a sermon, it is a system. Inspections move upstream. Instead of catching failure at the end, crews engineer the chance for failure out of the steps that create it. A wiring harness that once required 3 hands and a reach now builds flat on a pegboard, flips, and drops into place without a fight. A fixture that used to demand a guess becomes self-jigging. The guest leaves the building and does not come back. Times drop. Rates rise. A name in an inspection cage becomes a standard on the floor. If she says reject, the conversation ends and the fix begins. Pride follows the rule, not the other way around. The numbers have stories hiding in them. In one aircraft plant, the backlog on a hard bay disappears after a woman who has never seen a factory before the war redraws the staging rack so left-handed and right-handed operators stop colliding over parts. In a yard, a crew of welders, tired of fighting heat distortion on long seams, invents a staggered pattern that pulls the plates straight instead of bowing them. In a powder plant, a line supervisor who understands fear as a variable sets the shift to short rotations, writes a ritual for every click and clamp, and the accident log goes quiet. In a lab, computers, women with slide rules, turn ballistics into tables that fit into a gunner's pocket. Nothing explodes from it, so newspapers do not notice, but the crosshairs do. Add communications, the war's bloodstream. Switchboards and message centers that stuttered under surge begin to hum because the people at the keys know the difference between traffic and noise, urgency and panic. Weather plots arrive on time, forecasts improve, and pilots stop flying into the invisible. The ledger does not say fear reduced. It says sorties completed. But anyone who has stood under low cloud and waited for a voice on a radio knows what those numbers mean. The ledger also records the cost. Solvents bite, repetition bites, night shifts and bus rides bite, clinics reduce the worst injuries and miss the ones that creep, wrists aching, backs tight, eyes that no longer relax at distance after hours of focusing at arm's length. Posters push safety, supervisors scaffold it. Still, the accident file is not empty, and some towns will carry a date they cannot forget. The truth does not diminish the achievement, it clarifies it. Output is a product of method and courage, both. Then, the biggest number of all, the one no single factory owns, arrives at the end of a year. The curve of production outpaces the curve of loss. Aircraft destroyed do not exceed aircraft replaced. Ships sunk do not exceed tonnage launched. Radios, trucks, boots, tents, rations. The pile grows faster than battle can burn it. The arsenal's promise is kept not by speeches, but by shift rosters filled and standards enforced. You can hear it in a depot at night. Crates thudding, clerks calling lot numbers, a sergeant checking a manifest and grinning, because for once, the column labeled back-ordered is short. Breakthroughs get headlines when they are spectacular. A warship launched in record time. An airfield whose output doubles in a quarter. A canyon of buildings lit all night that turns out engines by the thousands. But the quieter breakthroughs shape the day. The training within industry bulletins that teach a foreman to teach, a radical idea hidden in plain sight, turn a sharp tongue into a tool that can build people instead of breaking them. The ergonomic afterthought, raise the bench, lower the crate, flip the sequence, turns fatigue into throughput. The nursery that opens at 5 a.m. serves hot cereal and keep the same staff on the same room for months at a time turns worry into work. These are not anecdotes. They are process changes with human beings at the center, and they pay in minutes saved, then hours, then ships and planes that exist because someone could stay on the line. The end of the day, of many days of the war's long day, arrives on a schedule no one on the floor controls. The line slows. Overtime fades. The bulletin board that always had something new to post has a notice that looks like a rumor and a wound. Layoffs. Men in uniform, home on discharge, appear at the gates with duffel bags and a paper that says priority reemployment. The word temporary suddenly grows teeth. Women who have signed their names to inspection tags for years are told the tags will not need their names next month. Some supervisors try to keep the best, some do not try at all. The ledger adds a new column. Skills that will not be used here anymore. What returns to normal and what refuses. Pay scales snap back faster than memory. Posted rates rewritten. Classifications disappearing with the speed of chalk under rain. Day nurseries close because the emergency is over. The emergency of childcare, which never actually ends, returns to private kitchens and neighbors' kindness. Newspapers publish pieces about a woman's place, and a generation that has held a bucking bar long enough to feel its weight reads the headline and frowns. Some go home gladly, without apology. They have done what the country asked and want a different rhythm. Some stay, because a plant manager with an eye for talent finds a way. Some change industries entirely, insurance office, lab, hospital, city hall, and carry the war's habits into peacetime rooms that don't yet know they will be changed by them. The unions write the memory into contracts where they can. Seniority lists that once had no women's names now do. Pension plans that would have skipped a cohort stretch to include months that were supposed to be invisible. The arguments are as fierce as ever about shifts and pay and who counts. But the vocabulary has shifted. Cannot has less oxygen. We did sits in the middle of the table like a fact. On kitchen tables, the proof looks like skills that did not exist in that house 4 years earlier. A micrometer in the junk drawer that still reads true. A pair of safety glasses with scratches across the field of view. A worn patch where a lunch pail rubbed the same corner every day. In attics, a badge on a lanyard, a nurse's cap folded flat, a pin with wings. In a pocketbook, a small card from an employment office stamped with a date that moved a life. On paper, the proof looks like totals that will lodge in history. Fleets measured not in ships but in convoys worth of hulls. Squadrons that chew through replacement tables and are fed anyway. Supply chains that snake from prairie to pier to island and are kept taut. Inside those numbers are names that never make the back page of the paper and never needed to. An inspector whose insistence kept a wing from cracking later. A welder whose seam did not leak pressure at altitude. A dispatcher who kept a train moving when a bridge ahead iced. A lab assistant who repeated a test because the first result smelled wrong and the retest caught a flaw that would have flowered into failure on the far side of an ocean. At the in-between scale, the scale a camera loves, the proof is a handshake. A foreman who said, "You don't belong," and later said, "You saved us a week." A steward who took a grievance that looked like a pebble and made it the lever for a boulder. A crew that kept a picture tacked to a post, a man in uniform, a sister in uniform, a child in a paper crown at a kitchen table. The picture never changed, the hands under it did. What remains after the ledger closes is the habit of competence and the expectation of being counted. A woman who could set an angle plate square under the worst fluorescent light ever installed will not accept the premise that she cannot chair a meeting, run a shop, or pass a licensing exam. A nurse who kept wards functioning under shell fire will not find a peacetime hospital intimidating. A computer who turned pages of equations into tables a bomber crew could trust will look at a post-war machine with vacuum tubes and see a future, not a novelty. The nation, which asked for everything, gets something it did not list in the requisition, a larger definition of us. Close the books, then open them again, because this war's ledger is not a ledger only of things. It is the story of a conversion that reached into hands and rooms and minds and did not fully retreat when the whistles fell silent. The numbers are loud because the work needed them to be. The legacy is quieter. A confidence that says we can do it and means we already did. And a promise that the next time capacity is destiny, the country will remember where it found the extra capacity last time. Finale. We can do it again and always. Listen again. The same morning whistle, the same doors swinging wide. A line of people, bandanas tied, badges clipped, time cards punched, steps into the light and takes its places. The poster on the wall is still there, but now it reads like a receipt, not a promise. The country asked, women answered, the ledger balanced in planes that flew, ships that sailed, radios that spoke when they had to. What began as a slogan ended as a method. The lesson is not a myth about grit alone. It is the choreography that turned grit into output. Recruit broadly, train hard, certify fast, standardize procedures, inspect without apology, improve every shift. It is safety as strategy, guards on presses, stamps on bend tests, clinics that kept hands steady and eyes clear. It is childcare as logistics, nurseries that opened before dawn and closed after midnight so a second shift could be real. It is managers measured by the competence they build in others, inspectors trusted to halt the line, and crews free to rearrange the work when the jig or the schedule was wrong. This is how a free nation grows capacity, by opening its workshops to all of its talent and backing that welcome with systems that let excellence scale. The faces in the story do not dissolve when peace arrives. A nurse who learned triage under shellfire carries calm into wards that will never hear artillery, and patients live because of it. A computer who filled notebooks with ballistics tables walks into a post-war lab and sees, in racks of tubes and cables, a future she already knows how to wire. A welder who read distortion in a line of light opens a small shop and teaches apprentices to see what she sees. A whack who ran a message center that could not fail becomes the person you want running anything that cannot fail. Checklists, gauges, shadow boards, job methods, habits born under emergency become peacetime advantages, and the line between women's work and the work fades where results are the argument. Not every promise held. Layoff notices came fast. Rates slipped where no one was watching. Some nurseries shut their doors the moment victory paraded down Main Street, as if need itself had been a temporary condition. And yet, the deeper change did not go quietly. Competence, once claimed, refuses to surrender its badge. The country had seen who could measure to 1,000th and hold tolerance all day, who could land a transport in weather, who could wire a panel so clean that the test lamp rose like a constellation. That knowledge survives every memo to return to normal. The double V, victory abroad and at home, did not end with a headline either. Its second half would take decades of petitions, sit-downs, court cases, ballots, and courage. But the war burned a proof into the film. When barriers fell, even temporarily, output rose. When talent met training, quality climbed. When people stood shoulder to shoulder at a line, the arguments about who belonged at that line sounded smaller beside the ship sliding down the ways. The memory of that efficiency would sharpen the conscience of the years to come. So keep the icon, but keep the inventory too. Keep the bandana, the rolled sleeves, the fist on the lunch pail. And keep the training schedules, the safety logs, the child care rosters, the grievance forms that made pay match the posted rate, the charts that bent scrap down and throughput up. Keep, above all, the names behind the nickname. Rosie was not one woman, she was millions, diverse as the nation itself. Riveters, welders, inspectors, computers, nurses, clerks, pilots, riggers, forewomen, stewards. The poster became a mirror because so many faces could find themselves in it. If you need a last image, take this. A hand reaches to punch a time card, and the camera lingers not on the clock, but on the palm. Calloused, nicked, steady. That hand has bucked 1,000 rivets and soothed 1,000 fevers. It is signed for loads and rejected parts. It has balanced a child on a hip at midnight and a torque wrench at noon. It belongs to a citizen who knows what it takes to turn a building full of machines into a promise kept. We can do it, again and always, because we is the lever. Open the doors wide, recruit from every street, teach with precision, guard the hands and the eyes, trust the inspectors no, fund the nursery before the overtime, measure what matters and improve what you can touch. Then listen for the sound that means a free country is at work, belts turning, presses cycling, a ship's whistle from the river, a radio crackling to life. That is the sound of a lesson learned, and a capacity saved for whatever the next hard thing asks.